Ericsson, would it be okay if we record? Would it be okay if we record this?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay.
It probably is previously recorded. So let me just clarify one thing that was said. Let's see, maybe I can do, I think this works better. Let me do PowerPoint share. This was actually something that was done for a conference. You guys seeing the full screen with just the slides? I noticed I have a popped up view of you guys. I want to make sure you're not seeing that.
We can see it.
You can just see the slides, right? Not.
Yep.
Yeah, we just see the slide.
Okay, great. Perfect. This was done for the 2021 American Society of Mechanical Engineers, their International Mechanical Engineering Congress and Exposition. This is actually the first time they've gone virtual. So typically it is a conference that's held in a international setting. I'll just a moment to tout a recent award. And this is when you guys, this is the times when you do those kind of things. I know maybe you're not so comfortable about touting your successes, but in this particular case, I was the opening speaker for the conference, but next year I will be the grand speaker for the conference because I've been awarded their top award for 2022, which is, ooh, that's terrible. I think it's the Carl Rowe. Now I'm messing up the name of the award, but whatever it is, it's the top award. And so it's unusual for a federal employee to be able to accept a monetary prize, but this comes with a $12,000 gift and a $15,000 gold coin. Travel to Arizona, and they're actually going to pay for my FLL captain and co-captain to travel with me to Scottsdale, Arizona, which I love. I love that place. And then I will travel to the international conference in next November. So sometimes all the hard work pays off, and I get to value some of the fruits of my labor. So this focus is more so about really the things that we've been doing in mechanical engineering across the world. And so I figured that because some of the things that you guys are doing directly fall in line with largely mechanical engineering, I would go ahead and give you guys a chance to see this. So with that said, let's make sure I've got so for me, as you know, a person, I have always found a lot of inspiration in the things that people have contributed in the past. And for me, that starts with ancestors. And I really feel in tune with my ancestors, particularly because I talk a lot about the contributions of the West Nile civilization, but I also talk a lot about contributions of people of color here in the United States. And so I also try to stress to students how important it is to have mentors. So I like this quote here at the bottom with John F. Kennedy. He says, "We celebrate the past to awaken the future." So there you see a little picture of me when I was a girl in first grade. And so for me, one of the biggest inspirations of my childhood was watching humans, and largely men at that time, go to the moon. One of my favorite first probably statements hearing and learning quickly was Neil Armstrong's statement, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." As we look at being inclusive, I would probably modify slightly to say maybe humans, because you're leaving out 50% of people on this earth when you just say man. And so for me, as a first grader, we're very fortunate. I was bused to schools in predominantly white neighborhoods because the schools were actually better. They offered a better curriculum, and I was an excelling student. And because of that, the students and the families probably had better family income. So we were lucky that a parent could bring a TV into school. It was a small black and white TV, and we all crowded around, us little first graders, and we watched the men go to the moon. And that was truly a aha moment for me as a child. I do remember, ironically, us kind of saw in our little groups of students talking about how we thought these guys were really old and how we hoped that we didn't have to be that old to become astronauts because they were in their 30s. Okay, so we were 6 years old. But the relevancy at that time, I thought, I'm not sure that I would want to do that when I'm that old. I want to do it when I was younger. But as you guys have learned, and probably the many people in this audience know, it takes a lot of experiences to get to that point, to be able to really support those programs. And when I talk about mentors, Katherine Johnson was somewhat of a mentor for me. I first met her on a school bus going to go speak at schools. So both of us were the featured speakers. We were passionate about sharing the information and encouraging students to end STEM careers. So we were on our way to a technical high school in Philly. And I really felt like I needed to sit next to this woman, not really knowing of all her contributions at the time. And I asked her very timidly, Miss Johnson, what was it like to, create the orbital navigation equations for men to reach the moon? And she just very graciously said, oh, child, it was easy. It was just like solving a puzzle. I looked at where the moon would be and solved it backwards in time. And I was like, duh, oh man, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, I didn't think about that, And so she just had this graciousness to speak to this young person who recently received a Ph.D. And so I take on that persona and try to remember to be that way, because even when I'm at my most tiredest moment, speaking and shaking hands at multiple, venues and conferences and working all day, I still try to remember to show, as we say, gracious professionalism, and to hopefully note that anything you say at any particular time may inspire another person. And so I'm always just very careful about, treating people that way. Some of the things that I've found that have been extremely helpful for me is being very determined. I think that you guys, having visited recently Africa and seeing the things that can cause lots of hiccups in a different person's life may perhaps inspire you to say to myself, wow, I don't realize how fortunate I am, how fortunate we are in living in a country like the United States, where we take things for granted, like power, until, of course, we have big storms like we had a few days ago, right? We still had, for some time, people I know in Virginia were out of power. But those are the times when we realize how fortunate we are, but we should build upon those opportunities and use them to the utmost to really push us forward, and often to be more successful with those added advantages. Many of us use this term grit now, and it's showing that grit even in the face of failure. I think that really allows scientists like Einstein to be successful, because we know how many times were they not successful before they were able to really solve a problem. So here I am, and I noticed that a lot of people put, her, she, his, her, them, they. But when I was a young child, it really made a difference on your gender. Here I was, a little girl who liked to play sports. I lived in the projects, so this is actually part of the property for the apartment buildings that I lived in. Across the street, as you can see, were usually single family homes, and girls did not play baseball. They, at the time, I think within a few years, movies like the Bad News Bears and other things like that came out. Jodie Foster played a role of a young girl, I think, who was capable of playing baseball, but girls did not get to go on the field and play baseball. But I was one of those girls that wanted to. So I put this picture in to show that I was still determined to play sports, and I did. At that age, I was probably one of the better football players when we played football on the playground. And I think that allowed me to have a balance in my life. And as you can see here, my friend up in the left-hand corner is an astronaut. Leland actually tried out for the Dallas football team. And so athleticism, but also the things we learn from playing on teams, we feel are some of the greatest things that we can utilize in the skills that we do as engineers. Leland is a material science chemical engineer. That was his background. And after he injured himself in that tryout, he actually went back to grad school and then eventually applied for the astronaut program. But for me, as you can see, I do a lot of athletic things. And yeah, there I am in the middle kissing my boo after we won our first championship for D.C. We have now 3 championships under our belt. So for co-ed softball. And I learned leadership skills and management skills with the things that I do collectively in some of the sports I play. And I must mention that it also moving into a field like aerospace engineering, I'm not intimidated with being around men. You know, I really felt secure because I had played sports all my life around men. And so I think that that's also something that was helpful for me as a young lady. Moving forward into sort of thinking about the things in my career, one of the things that was most impactful to me was really the first shuttle disaster. And it was a moment that struck me, of course, with deep sadness, as to, you know, and to feeling like, how could we let that happen? How did that happen? Which led to that inspired thought of like, how can we avoid that in the future? Which I believe is what engineering is all about, like really solving hard problems and trying to secure the safety of the humans that we support. And so this was a moment, a reflective moment of really, how do we prevent this and where do I really want to fit in the aerospace field? So I was probably, I think it was my senior year actually when this occurred. But it also made me think about where I wanted to go, because at that time, I really was encouraged and wanted to apply for jobs at NASA, but then jobs at NASA were really shut down for a period of time to try to fix what had happened. And so as I was doing my interviews, many people were encouraging me to apply for things like strategic defense. And I really was not interested in what I consider more destructive, like uses of the aerospace industry with missiles and things like that. I really am about protecting Mother Earth. And so I became very interested in science missions. Still lots of interest in manned missions, but I began to really explore like the possibility of working on science missions. And then I decided I'm not going to enter the workforce in the long traditional manner, but I end up going on to grad school. And so that's how I ended up in this region and ended up going to school at Howard University. I've been very fortunate to have a very varied career. I've considered myself an East Coast girl, having stayed, starting in Brooklyn, New York, and then going on to private school. I got a scholarship to go to private school in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the Cambridge School of Weston. And during one of my classes, a teacher was giving me the homework, and I would go to the back of the homework, do the homework, pass it in while she was teaching the class. And she decided, you know, you should apply for this program at MIT. She was actually an MIT alum. And so it was what we call a minority program, students of color. And there you see that second picture with me building the bridge. That was actually at MIT during that summer program. That picture ended up on the front page of the Tech Talk for MIT. And so I then said, if they're willing to put this little brown young girl on the front page of the newspaper, then perhaps it's a place that would be inclusive and supportive of my education. And so I applied to MIT. And I must say, I did scramble to really get myself ready for MIT, which was not ready for MIT. I didn't take calculus before I went to MIT. I took pre-calculus and analytical geometry, trigonometry, physics and chemistry all of my senior year because I was determined. There was the grit. I wanted to be determined. And then you can see over the course of my career, I've had lots of other successes, but deciding to go on to graduate school and then also being a professor, not just at universities, but also teaching at a middle school at a point. And then being on various boards, and the list just kind of goes on with the way that I continue to support engineering and engineering education, although I still practice as an engineer, a manager, a technologist, now new business lead, and some of the other facets of the things that I do at my center. So I am very competitive, and I'd say, but don't hate the game, change the game, be innovative, and be a risk taker. And you guys are obviously showing some of that. But I also say some of that because there are things that have been traditionally said about African Americans or for women and our capabilities in the engineering disciplines. And I think it's really important for you to have that balance on your teams of non-like-minded individuals, like-minded in the end goal, but the fact that they have these diverse experiences actually sometimes offers unique solutions. They come in with a unique perception of how they approach the things in their life. And that can be very advantageous when you're really trying to build a great team. I had to really get permission to continue to teach because we expected to do engineering things. And I felt that was really important to me when I first became a manager, that I didn't want to lose the technical skills, but I wanted to contribute to something larger and bigger than myself, which is really the future of our nation, or the future of our world, as well as creating science products or instruments that would afford us great knowledge in the future. Again, I love John F. Kennedy, a lot of the statements, and so you'll see a few of them here, but together, let us explore the stars, conquer the deserts, eradicate disease, tap into the ocean depths, and encourage the arts and commerce. So right here, he sounds like he's a STEAM guy, like, you know, not STEM, but STEAM, because he also mentions arts as well. And I think that all of those skills and opportunities to learn and grow as an individual really are very important. And so it's not just about the technical aspects, but people that work in our fields, if they don't have the ability to communicate with others, if they don't have the empathy to understand when a team member is overworked, it can cause lots of problems for us on our missions. And so we constantly are checking in with each other, trying to maintain, especially in this difficult time where we're somewhat siloed, but to make sure that everyone is physically and mentally well, and then to be inclusive and to utilize people's ideas, hear their voice when they're coming up with solutions. I really do think I'm very fortunate to have many successes, and these are just some of the successes with some firsts. There are lots of firsts in my career in books, and I've been, awarded some big things like you just heard. But I think that it was never how I started out my career. I just worked really hard at my career. And often I didn't mention the ASME award, but I want you guys, when you get a chance, to go Google the Washington Award. I found that there were some similar people on both awards, like Bill Nye the Science Guy received the Washington Award. I saw Neil Armstrong on the Washington Award, Orville Wright, Herbert Hughes. And when you look at this new award I'm receiving, Bill Nye the Science Guy is on there as well. Dean came in, if you guys aren't familiar with him, the builder of the Segway. Someone who I'm really admire a lot is our former administrator, Charlie Bolden. And then someone also from our local area, Shirley Ann Jackson. She's a nuclear physicist and was the president of Renouncia Polytech Institute, but also the leader of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission when Clinton years she was appointed that position. And so there are some really influential people on that list. And then one that I'm just over the top about is Carl Sagan. So Carl Sagan has received the award that I mentioned. And for me personally, to shine in that way, I reflect on my community, you know, locally, Washington, D.C., having, you know, where I nurtured the most of my career, but then to expand across to how I represent for the United States and for women and women of color. It really is a phenomenal thing for me to have these opportunities to shine. And I often say that there are many other women that probably could receive this award based on their contributions. So I feel that I'm very fortunate to represent for so many others. And I never feel like it was just me. I think there's so many people that have supported my career, just as you guys are experiencing here. So never forget the mentors who have touched your life and the lessons you learn from them, because these are things that will carry you into the way you carry yourself as an adult. So just to move into some of the things and the ways that I feel fortunate that I've been able to support the things that we learn collectively in science. And having worked at Goddard Space Flight Center, Langley Research Center, and NASA headquarters has allowed me to work in different aspects of science. So we cover largely a large bit of earth science through the things that we do at Goddard. And you can see two of the missions I supported. The tropical rainfall measuring mission was something I did as an attitude control systems engineer. Here we're looking really at how you make measurements in missions, and particularly the tropical rainfall. It was a mission that was joint between Japan. It was actually launched on a small island in Japan. Scary for the team members because small monsoon came in right after the launch. And so they hunkered down in this small area, but we were very successful with the measurements. And then the other mission, which was this one that I'm profiling, is ISAT-2, which was my last mission as an instrument manager. It was a $500 million instrument on $1 billion project. So half of the mission's cost was attributed to this sole instrument here. It's a laser altimeter. What it does is it measures very succinctly the distance between from the ice sheets. So you are measuring in time. You get a measurement in time very accurately for when you send the photon beam down, and then you can figure out the distances, and then you can create the topography or shape of the surfaces. And so ISAT actually looks both at the ice sheets, both on land and in the oceans, as well as vegetation topography. And so there are reasons you are probably quite familiar with in terms of climate variability and the climate change that we're experiencing. Many people dub it as global warming, but there is these definitely dramatic effects that we can show, as you can see in these maps, where there are these changes in the features of ice and how they're covering the poles. And so this just shows you kind of the overview of the things that the ISAT can look at and how much our cryosphere is changing in the warming climate. So one of the things that I really found were so impactful this year, because that mission, some of the missions I just mentioned, of course, you saw that there were international contributors there. But one of the things that I want to pivot to is how we as a nation, as a world, work together to solve a huge problem like COVID. And there are so many people working on this problem. It's great to see how people have unified across the world to try to solve this global problem. I often coin this as a phrase that I came up with some time ago, and I will say it quite a bit, is that when diverse ideas collide, they spark innovation. One of the things that I have really pushed is, and thought about, after reading there is a book that talks about some of the greatest inventions of civilization. And one of the things they talked about was, believe it or not, coffee houses, tea houses. At the time it was tea houses. We gravitate more to coffee houses like Starbucks. But what it was the author was talking about the change that occurred with having tea houses, particularly the one that I guess was initially the first one, they think, in London, where people at that time did not always have the perfect source of clean water and things to drink. So a lot of people spent time inebriated because they drank beer. And at this time, when they began to really introduce and steadily introduce the idea and concept of tea, the boiled water, clean water allowed people to have something else to drink, but it also allowed people to congregate together to have conversations across different disciplines. And so this was opportunities for ideas, as it says, to collide and to spark new discussion or ideas. Again, I talk about diversity, not just in the aerospace field, but you can see here that in industry, it has become one of those really important topics. And I love how we become more embracive of how people can contribute to the solutions that are necessary. But it's not just about cultural differences, right? It's people have different perspectives and ways of thinking. Say somebody from the liberal arts, or maybe much more artistic. I remember when I came into my first calculus class, how the professor said, actually, it was my third calculus, it was differential equations. And the professor said, this is the artist's point of view, and this is the analyst's point of view. And he showed two different sort of ways of looking at the problem, as just like you see here, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the wrong way to look at the problem, right? It's collectively just different views of the problem. And so I put these two here, posting you that sometimes, different ways of thinking are a better way of working together. So virtual disruptions, right? There've been lots of changes across the world and through our countries and in our personal lives, socially, with work, with school. Many of us, just like right here, we've pivoted to these virtual meetings. I'm finding that my daughter does not use pencils and pens much, like we bought all the school supplies and they haven't gotten used because she's always on the laptop, right? We've got new tools, headphones and microphones. We've got laptops, hotspots. We've got lighting fixtures, right? Selfie. My daughter loves to use it for selfie, the ring light, right? But I use it for when I speak. And then we're now trying to think out the box of how we have fun. How do we get together? From our social activities. For me, we had to have the family virtual holiday party, right? So it gave me a chance to kind of have the attention of my family in a different way. Of course, I love this new commercial where they show some kind of jacket that a person puts on, and they have a counterpart in a different country who they haven't seen, like their mom or dad for many years. And the other person has a jacket and they hug each other by touching their shoulders or their jacket. And the person on the other side can feel that hug. I mean, it's really pushed the envelope of how we do things virtually and how we still can communicate and feel and love and touch each other. It made me think too, that particular one, of how we were going to work together with this robot that we had, which was a capacitor reflector. And so it had a sensing device, and this was many, many years ago, a sensing device that allowed us to feel where the robot's arm was and where it was going to, as it was approaching something. So this is the same kind of technology that we're now embedding in our everyday lives, I'm pretty sure. Maybe some other type of sensor or vibration or something like that that's in those devices. But those were the beginnings of these type of opportunities. And so here, this was last year, not this particular year, but this was last year. At the time, we were still building up our senior team. So it looks like a whole lot of women and one man, but that was because there are only 2 senior sort of engineers, and we had people kind of doing details. And then now we've got a full repertoire. So it's much more balanced with the number of women and men in our division senior leadership. But this was what we did to make fun and to have people. We did, our own party with games and things like that. And now virtual learning, of course, and communication is the new norm. As we can see, places like MIT were already very intentional about putting things online. So if you guys want to learn subjects before you even get into college, you can go online and look at what some of the universities are offering. My daughter is at Howard University Middle School of Math and Science, and one of the things that I thought was so lucky for them is that they were already using an electronic-based system for their courses and classwork. So when COVID hit, they were able to really pivot really quickly to students being able to address their curriculum and follow and track their curriculum, and their teachers follow and track their progress because they were already on some of these type of platforms. There are some advantages and disadvantages for us with recruiting students. I feel like it's less personal when I'm not in the same room talking to somebody for interview, but it still has to work because we still need to hire people. It does help us save costs. It probably does also help us with, pollution. I know that initially we saw drops in the carbon dioxide from fossil fuels initially. And then we began to see people like in our professional organizations here, American Society of Mechanical Engineers, 90,000 plus strong membership for that professional organization. But they pivoted to some virtual things in collaboration with others. And you'll see some of these, particularly the 3D printing exchange, how that has helped healthcare professionals. And then they had now offering these e-learning courses similar to what I mentioned at MIT. So I am an MIT alum, so I am focusing a little bit on some of those. I do sit on a board there as well, so I kind of keep really in tune with some of the things they've done. But they started off with their coursework on, and then they decided, you know what, we're really not in the business for providing the platform to how you receive this information. So they kind of spun it off, and the money that they received from it, they actually are putting back into their digital learning classes. So they sold it for like 800 million, some of this content. And then now they're putting it back into really a nonprofit that's led between MIT and Harvard University to really try to help enable like this personalized learning for students. I really commend them in that because I just think it's an excellent opportunity to really expand and to level the playing field so that more of us can be really productive and contributing to the new knowledge necessary. And so I recognize that my own chapter, which we run the BAM Code Academy, similar to you guys doing your outreach. We were at Howard University's campus, and then we were specifically at the middle school using their area and space during the first year and a half of our existence. And then boom, we had to pivot again quickly into this virtual world, but it's actually worked better. We've seen our attendance become more consistent for our students. We've got lots of successes to tout, but this just shows you some of our classes and the personnel that we work. BAM stands for Blacks at Microsoft. So we work with them to teach this portion of the things, one of the things that we do in the chapter. So Isha and Sudesh, and I'm forgotten the last young lady's name, but this year
Anika?
they actually
Anika.
say it again.
Anika.
Nika.
Annika, yes. And so they were very gracious about coming in and supporting our teams this year. This was last year. Sudesh was very nice and gave the girls like one-on-one type of opportunity, just similar to what we did today, and looked through their submission sheets, listened to their presentations, and gave them great feedback to hone their skills, and actually, I believe, which helped them to be chosen as a rising star at the virtual international conference in Greece. They are NSBE national champions. They're not ranked as high in the overall open competition. NSBE ends up being a lot smaller field, but they have different challenges, I think, that than the school teams. Like, you guys have much more opportunities to meet regularly, particularly school teams get to meet after school every day. Our teams typically only meet on Saturdays in person. This year, I've really strived to have students at least meeting virtual once during the week, and then hopefully in person. Our numbers had fallen down to about 3 teams last year when COVID hit. And we had 1 team at the Explorer level, which is really small numbers for us. We're back up to 8 teams for the challenge section, and then we have 4 teams for the Explorer section. We have kids as young as kindergarten all the way through the 8th grade competing. We usually do VEX. We actually have, in the past, we were VEX DC champs before COVID. We had 3 teams at all different levels competing at VEX as well. So robotics is big for us, but we thank you guys for helping to prepare these winners as they are for us. So successes during COVID-19. And so I wanted to inspire you guys to see some of the things we've been doing at Goddard. First of all, international partnerships are essential for the things that we do. And one of the things that I don't talk in length about, but my research was really geared towards large space structures like the International Space Station. And you're not able to do things like that without having all of these different communities and countries come together to build something like that. It's very expensive. But I like to highlight on some of the contributions that women have made in our programs. And so many people aren't familiar with the Mercury 13. They do know about Project Mercury, primarily for what the men have contributed and were entered into that program. But there was a program of secretly trained women. Unfortunately, in the final phase of the program, Eisenhower mandated that the astronaut program or astronauts should come from the Air Force, which limited the capability for women because none of them were at that time really in the Air Force. And so it shut down that program. But what is now exciting is that one of the things that we are trying to make as a goal for the Artemis program, which will take us back to the moon, is having a woman as well as a person of color to arrive on the moon service. And so that's extremely exciting for me. Only 11% of the astronauts in space have been women. And so to see that we're really making a push to be inclusive of 50% of the world's population, to me is very important. And again, we collaborate. I want you to understand, when people have said, why do we spend so much money in space? Well, it's really not like it's just going to the federal employees. We have contractors that work on center. We have commercial partners, international partners that all share collectively. And so the money is going right back into our local populations, across the realm. And then this new forefront of astronauts flying on commercial vehicles, with the SpaceX crew. We have an opportunity to see private citizens, one of my favorite is a football player who recently had like a 10-minute flight. You know, just to have those kind of people become advocates for the future of traveling in space, I think are immeasurable, because we are seeing there's this real chance that, you know, walking everyday human beings in the future will be having the opportunity to be in space. So I will say, yep, that there is enough space for everyone. And so I wanted to bring this to your attention, the student-run effort of collecting messages across the world, and then they were being etched on to a disk and then sent up to the International Space Station. And one of the things that had been done quite often in the past was when we had these missions like the Viking mission, which exploring across the caverns of space, there are things etched into the side that will relay the mentions of humanity, DNA, you know, as you can see some there's love and peace signs, but a way of sort of showing our footprint as humans out in space. So we've really had some successes over this past year with Hermes and Solaris. You can see we've got our Sweet Star program with Earth Science and instruments that are aboard of a plane. We've got IceCube, which is that small CubeSat that you see being launched. Typically, we launch a lot of the CubeSats from a carrier that's actually made in Silver Spring to eject these CubeSats out into space from the International Space Station. A huge one is the James Webb Space Telescope. I was actually near-spec detector manager for a portion of time, $60 million effort just for the detectors that are so important. That was launched on Christmas Day. And I learned yesterday that the first part of the primary mirrors was successfully deployed. So if you look at that honeycomb shape there, it actually is folded up. So the two outer sort of edges are folded into a configuration, and then that has to be deployed. Well, if anybody knows mechanisms, we're always squeamish about that is the single point of failure with mechanisms moving into place. The tripod that you see out in front of it, that actually holds a secondary mirror. So the gold honeycomb covered mirrors are the primary mirror, the secondary mirror is up on that tripod. And then in the middle, you see that black area, that's actually what the secondary mirror focuses down into and then sends the signals down into the detectors. And so without those major components, you don't have the telescope, a Cassegrain type telescope in place. So now we have been able to arrive at multiple successful deployments. And then I want you to notice the sort of, I don't know if you can kind of see it, but almost like a purplish hue. There's like a silver kind of lining of layers of things. Those are actually like Mylar covered inflatable sun shields. So there are 5 layers. They had to completely deploy without any kinks because one kink would disrupt the others because it's layered, but they were inflated to become very rigid, but they're, Mylar to be very lightweight when launched. And so all of those pieces also have been successfully deployed. So we are really just screaming and hollering because this is a $10 billion instrument, $10 billion. And it is the largest telescope, one of the most complicated things we've ever launched into space. And then here, I want you to show you this like cool thing called the planetary dragonfly. So that was recently selected. So we are now in the nuances of building this. It's awesome, cool stuff. So we'll actually have a drone in the future to be on other planets. So I thought that something else should have launched, but maybe it's on a different slide. But here you guys can see some of the other successes. We've had multiple successes on Mars. And most recently, we had Perseverance, the Mars rover, and it actually carries microphones. So for the first time, we can actually hear on Mars, and I don't know if you guys can hear it, but you can hear the whirling of the blades of the Ingenuity Mars helicopter. So the first time we've ever had a helicopter launched and landed on another planet as well. So autonomously, the things we do with robots, of course, autonomously, we're going to be doing some things with our helicopter. And so the skills that you guys are learning now are really important for the future of where we go. And then I wanted to show you guys, this was just one that we were ecstatic about, actually landing and tapping down onto an asteroid, Bennu. So OSIRIS-REx actually was the mission. And there is a gentleman that actually, we were in the second program I was in, NASA Together, and he is the deputy project manager. So I'm really proud of my, my colleague reaching these kind of successes in our, for me, almost 30 years at NASA. I think he's close to that because he's a little bit younger than me, came a little bit later, but we were able to touch down on Bennu, collect samples, and now they're back on their way. So that's actually my friend, the one rubbing his head. And so we hope to get these samples in the near future, and we're thinking that this is going to be something that will tell us about the history of sort of how these asteroids are created, but also primarily understanding how this universe and the galaxies we know are created in the past. So lots of successes for NASA, but I want to now focus a little bit on mechanical engineering. And so this one is a large apparatus. It's actually what we call a cutter head that you can see from this picture. But the thing here is that the system, they're using big data systems to autonomously tunnel and bore through to create tunnels. So it had not been done autonomously before, but the importance of being able to collect all the data and then to drive the system, one, to be predictive and prescriptive, and to also avoid unforeseen incidents is really a huge success for this industry. And so there you can see them when they finally broke through using one of those systems. You can see the massive size of it, and then it shows you how they kind of collected all this data and have the systems working together to be able to do these boring. This one is in the nuclear engineering area. It was funded by the Department of Energy, and they were actually able to now have this system that drives and creates a predictive maintenance actually for nuclear power plants. And so that one can save money, but it also allows you to look at the loop, the flow loop of this system, which uses molten salt. It uses a molten salt reactor. The interesting thing is we kind of use salt, but not molten, in a different way with our cryogenic systems. But it is awesome to be able to modify and look at your system, but modify to really help reduce the cost of constructing these plants, as well as really physically driving the systems. And then this one is about really producing concrete, 3D printed concrete, but really in a strength forming manner. One of the things that is often difficult when you do 3D printing is to look at the homogeneity of the material and making sure that it is all prescriptively the same strength in any different orientation, or the same concentration in any or different orientation. And so this gentleman here, Jonathan Trent, is actually able to create a stronger version by using stretchable nanofibers in the substance called chitin, and he modeled it after the strength of a lobster shell. So he kind of used that idea looking at nature, and we've seen that a lot in robotics, where we look at nature and then sort of mimic other entities. So you guys are probably familiar and seen this in the past, but industry really kicked it up with additive manufacturing of the things and components that we needed for our health care workers and to keep us safe and strong. You know, even things as simple as like the swabs, like we really began to see that there was a shortage. So You can see some of the companies here, and they're international as well as local companies that were able to kick in and to create new designs and 3D print things to help with the repository. I remember I mentioned NSF also helping to work with these repository of files and file sharing, but they were being made across industry. And then something like what we are more in tune to think about with robotics. Well, yep, we've got these autonomous disinfecting robots, so we could actually launch them into, you know, areas where we think it's unclean, and they can do a self-guided system and work through a room and help to reduce, you know, a number of the microbes, you know, down to 99% of the microbes that are in that room. And then this last one here on the right is showing you the air filters that have helped to kill coronavirus. It's a heated nickel foam air filter. We use lots of air filters in my own industry for, we call them HEPI filters, but this takes it a step further to really reducing these very small microbes as well. And then one more autonomous robot that actually is kind of fun and helpful for the everyday person, where we could, in a 3-mile radius, deliver groceries or meals or other things for people that are either stuck at home and not able to get out. So we're looking at other ways of using robotics right here in our own communities. And then this one to the right, I don't know if you guys have this at your school, but the school that we've now moved into, I used it yesterday with our robotics team coming in. Make sure you check in, they come up to the screen. It actually has a silhouette of a head, so you kind of place your head, and then it says, you know, 99.9 degree temperature. It'll read it off. And the other thing it does is if you don't have a mask, it tells you you need to put on a mask. So it recognizes whether you have a face covering over your face as well. So these kiosks are really helpful for educators who don't have to sit there with a gun. So the future for all of us, you know, it looks very diverse. And I often liken back to my own experiences when I was a child. Yeah, I'm a Trekkie. I love watching Star Trek. And then realizing, you know, later when I reflected that this crew here was so diverse. It really was implanting the seed of, like, you know, the different cultures and groups of people that would work together on space missions in the future. Carl Sagan here says somewhere something incredible has been waiting to be known, and I hope that you guys, as the future, will be that opportunity to discover something exciting and new. I love the fact that I get a moment to inspire a dream. You guys are inspiring me in a reverse way, because I love to see when you guys are able to do the things that you do, which I never had those opportunities when I was young. And the next generation have so many different skills that I did not acquire when I was your age. So I'm very hopeful and always willing to support you in helping to achieve your dreams. So I love to inspire the next generation, but also the global pipeline. So my meetings initially with many of us know Oprah Winfrey, but I was able to travel to her school in South Africa. So I'm so happy that you guys were able to go to another country and work with students. There you see me at her school, but I've also been a guest speaker for many years, regularly at a Women in South Africa conference, inspiring. In the first one I attended was a really aspiring future aerospace engineers, because they had just started their aerospace, their government aerospace entity or agency. So remembering here again, I mentioned this to you guys here, but it's really become important across industry: diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. Remember to create those spaces, and it's about really how we are including people's voices. You know, so it's not just how you look, but how we are listening to the most quiet person in the room. We're allowing them to interject and to voice their ideas, which may be a great solution. And then being an ally, which I think you guys are doing an excellent job. So I commend you guys for the work that you do. So the future United, there is little we cannot do in hosts of cooperative ventures. Divided, there is little we can do. For we dare not meet a powerful challenge at odds and split her asunder. And I was like, gosh, he must really know about this time. And so I always find that when people say these broad statements and they're still able to be applied to, you know, the current day, I really think they are very visionary. And I appreciate those thoughts, because it reminds me of what's happening in our own country, and how because of political differences, we're really splitting ourselves apart when we really need to work together. So continue to work together. As I say, dare to do mighty things. As we say here, Robert Goddard, set goals, challenge yourself, achieve them, live a healthy life, and make every moment count. Rise above the obstacles and focus on the positive. As I say here, be greater than average. So I will end with sort of this statement, and it's the greatest salesman in the world. The prizes of life are at the end of each journey, not near the beginning, and it's not given to me to know how many steps are necessary in order to reach my goal. I will say, I will persist until I succeed. Remember that grit statement, right? But for me, one of the biggest things that was a challenge for me, I remember I mentioned I went to MIT without calculus. Well, that was a huge issue for me in my first year, because I was just like left behind so quickly without having calculus. I took the calculus classes, but not having them before I went to college was really a challenge in a place like MIT. Many, many students come in with calculus 1, sometimes 2 or 3. And so I had to really dig deep when things were tough and make that decision that I would persist until I succeed. I say drink up now, because we've got lots of cool lemonade. And remember to just have a bright perspective. When things are tough, you can make lemonade out of lemons. I always say aim high, shoot for the moon, and even if you miss, you'll be amongst the stars. And then one of my sort of famous statements, of course, is live long and prosper. So you guys continue to work hard. I also say peace. So you see the peace sign embedded in there. Positive energy activates continuous elevation. Thanks for listening today, and I wish you guys lots of success in your future competitions.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Ericsson. That was great. Really inspirational. I love seeing all those things, you know, at least being a little bit older. I remember a lot of the moments that you remember, like the Challenger and the things, you know. I think my advice to a lot of the students here is think about your generation, think about what is changing you and shaping you, and the things you're doing. So thank you very much.
I meant to show this real quick, because and give students a chance to ask questions, but I found something unique, you know, when I was looking at lemons. There are so many different lemons, I didn't realize that. And I found this one, Buddha's hands. And so for me, it was like, wow, this is really a unique thing, but each lemon has a different type of application or a different type of strength. And so use that to your advantage as individuals on your teams. And so I'll give you guys just a few minutes if you want to ask a couple of questions. I know we've gone a lot over the time, but I wanted to give you more things, the perspective of how it related to your lives, which is different than what I did when I did for professionals.
Yes. Okay, anybody have any questions?